We welcome in a very special guest from Inside Football. She covers the Giants for SI.com and also wrote the Big 50 New York Giants book, Patty Traina, and we welcome her in right now. Hello, Patty.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very nice of you to join us this morning. And one of the reasons that we wanted to speak with you today, we all know that you're a salary cap specialist and a salary cap guru. You do a great job of studying the numbers and the contracts. And we've had a lot of folks ask us during this offseason if the Giants have any more room to potentially add somebody else to the roster. Now, look, I think you and I have talked off the air enough to know that there's really not much wiggle room here, although there's always a way to do it if you really want to. They did add a couple of veterans in Kelvin Benjamin, the wide receiver / tight end, and running back Corey Clement just this past week during the rookie minicamp. Quite frankly, I was a little bit surprised that they did, but they did, and I'm sure those are for minimum deals. But as you see it now, is there much wiggle room if they did want to grab somebody who might pop free over the next few months?
There might be a little bit, and we're talking the next few months. You got to remember that as the Giants start to trim down the roster, right now they're at 90, and we're currently in the top 51 period, which means only the top 51 salary cap numbers count against the cap, which is why the teams obviously are able to accommodate 90 players. So I think as you see guys get released, turning the bottom of the roster and whatnot, you're going to see numbers that start to swap out, and the cap is going to be very fluid over the next, several weeks, couple months until we get into the season when it'll start to settle down a little bit. So that's where I think you're going to see some wiggle room. If, say, for example, late in the summer, the Giants want to add a veteran who shakes loose from another team, or if they want to, acquire somebody via trade or something like that.
How surprised were you that the two veterans got signed after coming in for tryouts this past week?
I wasn't so much surprised that Corey Clement got signed because we've spoken about how the Giants at the running back position a little bit thin there. Saquon Barkley, fingers crossed, everything works out fine. He comes back, he's as good as new, and he's able to do everything 100% green-lighted week one. Realistically, though, you have to be prepared in case that doesn't happen. Right now, head coach Joe Judge, he's unable to give anybody any kind of timetable to say, oh, yes, we'll definitely have Saquon ready for the start of training camp, for example. So you have to have backup depth. And right now, their only experienced backup was Devonta Booker, who they signed in the offseason, who can be an every down back. So by adding Corey Clement, now they just added to the depth at that position. They have some more experience to go along with Gary Brightwell, who's a rookie, one of the 6th-round draft picks. So they definitely needed to add to that spot. I was surprised, though, with Benjamin. And in thinking about it, because the Giants are loaded at receiver. They're kind of stacked at tight end. So I don't want to say that it was a pity signing. That's not fair to the player. But it is an opportunity for Kelvin Benjamin, who apparently wants to restart his career, to put together some fresh tape, to kind of, show teams around the league, if it's not the Giants, maybe other teams, that, hey, I'm ready to take this seriously. I'm ready to be a part of the team. His back in 2018 when his tenure ended, from what I understand, it didn't end on the best of notes, but it's a fresh start for him. And who knows, he might even end up on the Giants practice squad where he'll continue to develop.
Well, we don't know exactly what the practice squad rules are going to be this year. We know during the pandemic last year they expanded it. They had reserve lists. They also had a number of veterans that were allowed on that squad. And it remains to be seen if the league is going to do something similar this summer. But the tight end position as it stands now, with Rudolph and Ingram as your top two, and then Caden Smith and Levine Toilolo, Patty, I don't know if Benjamin could beat out one of those other two guys for the 3rd and 4th spot. Now, you mentioned the wide receivers room is very stacked. I don't see any way that Benjamin can beat out the wide receivers on this team. They just have too much depth there. So it seems to me he's either going to have to make it as a tight end or he doesn't make it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul, because, they are stacked. But, and then here's the other thing with tight ends that I didn't mention. you have Kyle Rudolph, who is coming off of foot surgery. So, he should be okay. He has said he'll be okay for the start of things, but did he mean the start of training camp? Did he mean the start of the season? That was a little unclear. But here's the other thing with Kelvin Benjamin. It takes a little bit different skill set to block in line and do some of the things that a tight end does versus a wide receiver who's out in space. So the Giants feel that he has the size. They feel that he has the tools to make that conversion, apparently. And, why not try it out? It's a low-risk, high-reward type of scenario. If it works out and, God forbid, Kyle Rudolph isn't ready, or God forbid Evan Ingram or Levine Tololo or Caden Smith get injured during the summer, now maybe you have a guy who can step in and fill in for them.
As it stands now, the OTAs have begun. Ian Rappaport of NFL Network said there were about 40 players or so for the Giants who did report. Joe Judge has said the guys who are here he will work with. The guys who are not here, because of the labor union obviously advising folks to stay away, he will undergo virtual training with, like they did during the course of last summer. What would be your thoughts as to how Judge is able to deal with this during his second season as the Giants head coach? Last year, I think it was very admirable. As a rookie, he was able to navigate those waters very well.
Yeah, he definitely was. And, he took everything slowly. He didn't push anybody, which is good. Obviously, first-year head coach, maybe your inclination is to hit the ground running and go 100 miles an hour. And he took it slowly. He didn't put those players, tax those players to where there were a lot of training camp injuries and whatnot. I think this year now it's an opportunity for them to work on what they started last year, get some of the new guys also into the fold, but also maybe now having some of these guys in person, that will allow them to hit the ground running a little quicker when they do report to training camp.
As it stands now, what is your biggest question as they go into the veteran mandatory minicamp coming up? And I guess it's only a few weeks now. I guess June the 8th is when they will have to be out there on the field. I mean, we all know the Saquon Barkley injury is going to be paramount in everybody's eyes, but is there something else that you're really anxious to see?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the offensive line. I know the Giants are very positive about the talent they have, but we still don't know yet who's going to be the starting right guard. We're not 100% certain that Matt Parrott is going to be the starting right tackle. It looks like that's how that's going. We don't know, is Shane Lemieux going to be the left guard? Is Will Hernandez going to be the left guard? So that lineup, to me, is the biggest question mark. That's what I'm interested in seeing how that comes to fruition, how they line it up in the mandatory minicamp and any OTAs if we happen to get to see the OTAs. Because that offensive line, if that line doesn't come together and that line is a problem, then all this other stuff that they put together in the offseason is going to be for naught, because it all starts in the pit, as you know, and the Giants really need for that offensive line to justify all the encouraging words that Dave Gettleman, Joe Judge, and the rest of the administrators have said about him.
Hey, Patty, let's dig into the offensive line a little bit deeper. I think at tackle, we feel like with Andrew Thomas there, Nate Solder there, and, of course, Matt Parrott, we feel like there's at least some depth there, even if Parrott doesn't develop the way the team hopes. What do you think happens at right guard? I think all of us think Shane Lemieux probably has the advantage at left guard. Do you think Will Hernandez has a really good chance of winning that job, or do you think it's going to be one of the veterans that they brought in this offseason that might be the safer choice?
I'll tell you what, John, I think that's kind of a tricky one, because I know from having watched Will Hernandez's social media account, he's been doing some work with Duke Manyweather, who's a noted offensive line trainer. He's been working on the left side and the right side. Now, that said, as we all know, just simply flipping from left to right, regardless if it's guard or tackle, it's not something that can be done overnight. I think you ask any coach, any player, any trainer, they'll say that it takes a lot of reps. It takes time to get comfortable when you're switching from one side to the other.
Sure.
And Will Hernandez has always been, I believe, a career left guard. That said, Will Hernandez has a very strong work ethic. I think he is working at it. I'd like to think that any residue or leftover symptoms that he might have had from COVID are gone. And we don't know if he did or not. He said he was fine, but you don't know how somebody gets affected by COVID. But I would think the safe choice, if I were to map out the depth chart right now, I would say pencil in Zach Fulton for right guard, but I would not dismiss the possibility of Will Hernandez maybe winning that job, if he doesn't beat out Shane Lemieux on the left side.
What do you think about that competition between Parrott and Nate Solder? We've all kind of written Solder off. He opted out last year. Then he decided to come back with a reduction in pay to compete and to fight for a job at the right tackle spot. Do you think he beats Parrott out?
I mean, you can't say no, but that said, I think the Giants would really like to go young on that offensive line. Matt Parrott didn't play that badly last year. I know towards the end of the year he had that ankle issue, I believe, and that cut into some of his snaps. Nate Solder, having not seen him in since 2019, what kind of condition is he in? And also remember, he hadn't played on the right side since I believe his rookie season, so that's going to take some getting used to. Going back to the question that you asked me about the guard situation, Nate Solder is a veteran. I know he's going to work at it, but I think if you had to pencil in who's going to be the starting right tackle when we get to the mandatory minicamp, I'm going to say you're going to see Parrott in that spot.
Interesting, Patty. I want to stick on the offensive side of the ball. How do you think they're going to divvy up these snaps at wide receiver? Now with the addition of Kadarius Toney, and you have the three guys, obviously you have Galladay, who you figure is going to be on the field nearly all the time, and then Shepard and Slayton, who are returning.
Oh, that's a great question, John, and that's one that I'm interested in seeing. One thing I will say, last year I think the Giants tried to run a little bit more of the 12 personnel in the passing game,
sure,
because they didn't really have three solid receivers. Sterling Shepard had the injury. Golden Tate struggled a little bit there. Darius Slayton was banged up. Now they can run a lot of 11 personnel, and they can do all kinds of neat things. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how they move guys around. I think you'll see Kadarius Toney probably working from the slot with Sterling Shepard. Maybe we see a double slot type of alignment. That would be kind of cool. Kenny Galladay, I think he's going to be a primary target. Darius Slayton, you can't forget him. I mean, there's going to be so many options. I don't envy these defensive coordinators the Giants are going to face and trying to figure out, okay, who's going to be the main man this week that we're going to have to shut down.
Boy, it's a great problem to have when you have so many options to choose from and you're not sure which guy is going to nose out the rest of them and win the job. So I'm going to flip it to the other side and force you to tell me who the starting edge rushers are going to be, because there is a collection of guys there who all want that job.
Yeah, there are. And I'll tell you what, you got to remember, you've got Lorenzo Carter and O'Shane Zimenez both coming back from season-ending injuries. Now, Lorenzo's was an Achilles. So the question you have to ask yourself is, does he have that burst? Does he have that quickness? Or is he still kind of working his way back there? That said, I think he will probably be one of the starters. On the other side, I would think Ojulari will probably be the favorite to start there, but I could see them going with a committee, because if you remember, some of the Giants' great defenses, the last two that were part of the Super Bowl teams, they had a rotation. They would put in a NASCAR package where suddenly they were throwing out 3-4 guys. So, when you think of the pass rush, it's not necessarily going to be just the two outside linebackers and then, Leonard Williams, will throw him in there because he's part of that. I think you're going to see Patrick Graham get very creative and just mix and match that personnel, and you're going to see, kind of like the receiving group where you're not going to know where to defend. You're not going to know where the pass rush is coming from, because I can see Patrick Graham coming up with these schemes where now it looks like, for example, Ojulari's coming out at you, but he drops into coverage. So it's going to be so much fun. I cannot wait to see what they come up with.
Patty, and I think, too, when you take a look at it, how do you think they're going to, in the secondary, balance Robinson and Holmes inside, because I think they're interesting because they're both slot players clearly, but I do think they're built differently, and I think maybe their strengths might be a little bit different. So how do you think Patrick Am's going to work those two guys inside at that nickel spot, along with guys like Logan Ryan McKinney, who can move inside as well?
Yeah, the great thing about what the Giants have done is they have options. And when you have options, you can get so creative with what you do, whether you go with a big nickel, which, as you know, worked so well for the Giants back in 2011 when they won the Super Bowl. Now with slot receivers, some of them are getting bigger and bigger. In the past, the slot receivers used to be, smaller guys. Well, now teams are wising up and they're putting tight ends and bigger players in the slots. And now with Aaron Robinson, who's, a little bit bigger than Darnay Holmes, who plays big, by the way. I don't want to discount what he does, but you have Aaron Robinson, you've got Xavier McKinney, you've got two nice physical guys who can match up against these bigger slot options that teams are throwing out there.
Patty, I want to ask you something a little bit off the beaten path here, because you did write the Big 50 about the New York Giants history. You'd put a lot of work into that, I know, because we were certainly having conversation as you did it. And George Young just got inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame during the course of draft week. And I know this Giants organization was so proud of that fact. I wonder, is there something that you learned about George in writing your book that either enlightened you or really impressed you and, made you feel and understand why he was so deserving of going into the Hall?
Well, besides the fact that he was just, he gave off the demeanor that he was a grouch, but he was really a very caring person. And I think anybody who finds success in no matter what job they do, it starts with having a connection with people. And I think George had that. But one of the things that kind of surprised me, and this was shared by Ernie Accorsi, he said George was often like and I'm paraphrasing here, you'd walk into his desk and he'd have piles everywhere, and it'd be like, hey, George, where's that report on player X? And George would know exactly where to go to find that folder. And Ernie's like, hey, his desk was like a hurricane had gone through it. So the fact that he was able to sort through all the mess, if you will, or the organized chaos, I guess is the best word to use for that, and find stuff. And that was kind of, I think, when he dealt with players and stuff, he was able to look past some of the stuff, the personality differences, the quirks, if you will, and just kind of get past all that stuff and say, hey, look, you're a fit for what we want to do. We want to bring you in and just work well with, for the most part, he worked well with Bill Parcells for most of the 80s there. And, the championships speak for themselves.
Patty, I love what his nephews said when they unveiled the bust and they gave them the crest of the Hall of Fame in that very large display framed plaque that they presented, when they said they just wanted people to know that George cared. And I can tell you this firsthand, he loved the game and the people who were in it. He really did care. And a great example of this, and, I'm sure you came across this as well. I remember when the Giants had hired Jim Fassel to be their new head coach in 1997, and they had come off a couple of struggling seasons under Dan Reeves. And that first year under Fassel, they wound up winning the NFC East. And the last game of the season, George knew he was retiring and he was going to wind up being a vice president of football operations for the National Football League. The Giants win that game. They clinch the division, and George goes down onto the field. And I would never see George out on the field on game day. That was not something he did. He did not want the spotlight. He wanted the players to enjoy what they had, and he made sure he was in the background on game day. But that day, after the game was over, he walked down onto the field, onto the sideline, and when it was all said and done and people were leaving, he sat on the bench and openly cried because he had felt that he had done justice by bringing the Giants back into the playoffs on his way into the NFL offices. And I thought that spoke volumes about the man and how much he cared about the people, the game, and the organization.
Yeah, I remember that story too. And You're absolutely right. And, again, a lot of people had an impression of George Young that he was a grouch, a guy who really wasn't social. But, I unfortunately wasn't there when, he was the GM. I missed him. But the beat writers that were there at the time, they spoke glowingly about him. They used to say how he would come down and, he would shoot the breeze with them, and he what do you guys want? And then he would go in and he would give you so much time, and he was just so generous with his time, and just really a tremendous man who knew a lot about football. I mean, Ernie Accorsi couldn't say enough good things about George Young and all the things he learned from him, and their friendship and how much it meant to him. So I'm kind of sorry that I didn't get to experience that, because I think I would have really, really liked George if I had the opportunity to, interact with him.
Well, he was a great teacher. I think Joe Judge would have loved him too, because he was a teacher and a historian and believed in structure and fundamentals. I remember George would always laugh whenever there was a 4th and 1. He would always say to me, I don't know why they just don't do a quick count and a quarterback sneak. The shortest point between 2 points is just a straight line. And he was just so practical, and he was so funny in so many ways. But I think, Patty, even today, when you think about over the years, all the people he influenced, from Ernie Accorsi, even to Jerry Reese, who had an early successful run with the Giants as a general manager, and a number of the scouts who had been around for some decades, I mean, you could tell that his influence was very, very heavily felt, and that was probably another part of the reason why he so much deserved to go to Canton.
Absolutely, and I just think it was a sin that it took so long to get him into Canton.
I know.
I wish he had been alive to enjoy it. Although probably, and again, this is just me guessing here, based on what I know about George, he probably would have been like, what's the big deal?
Exactly.
What's the hustle about?
He wouldn't have wanted to go on the stage.
Probably not. But you know what? Look, he deserved it, and I'm sure he's probably looking down and he's like, what's everybody making a big deal about? But it's long overdue, and I'm glad that injustice was finally corrected.
All right, Patty, before we wrap up here, I got one more for you. How do you look at the NFC East? I think it's a fascinating division. Going into last season, I think everyone predicted before the year it was kind of Dallas, Philly, then Giants and Washington, and the division basically got turned on its head with the way the standings concluded. And I think going into this year, everyone kind of thinks, all right, Philly's kind of in a little bit of a rebuild. They probably the least chance of winning. Then you have the other 3 teams that are all of different strengths and weaknesses and are all kind of in the mix there. How do you view this NFC East this year, and where the Giants kind of fit in that dynamic?
Well, I'm hoping that it's going to be a lot more competitive. That's for sure. I mean, we can't have the winner being a 6-10 or, having a record under 500. But that said, I really like what Washington has done under Ron Rivera. I mean, they've got a really good, and in my opinion, an underrated defense. I mean, that unit is something to be reckoned with. Down in Dallas, if I'm not mistaken, I think they have a new defensive coordinator down there.
Yep.
So how quickly they come together, a lot of focus has been on Dak Prescott and signing a long-term deal. Well, great. That's wonderful for them, but their defense last year was historically bad, and I think Dan Quinn's their new defensive coordinator. But so can they fix that? That's the big question there. And as you mentioned, the Eagles are kind of, in between, in that rebuild mode. The team I think to watch, and I'm not just saying this because I cover them, is I would say watch the Giants, because I think if everything falls into place, they can actually surprise a few people. And if it comes down to Washington and the Giants for the division title, I would not be surprised, because those are 2 up-and-coming teams. Now, obviously, things like injuries can derail the season. We all have seen that happen before. And then, like I said, there are still a few question marks they've got to settle. That offensive line alignment, is Daniel Jones going to take that next big step? Is the defense going to be, as good, if not better than last year? So there are still things that still need to be worked out. But if everything falls into place, I think it could come down to Washington and the Giants as being the 2 that slug it out for the NFC East title.
Patty, good stuff. Great to hear from you. Tell the folks where they can find you, your work, where you're writing now, your book, all that's good stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. You can find me on Twitter at Patricia _Traina, Traina. My book is The Big 50, The Men and Moments That Made the New York Giants. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books. And you can find my daily writing. I work over with the SI Giants page. It's called Giants Country, so you can find it there. And, of course, I host the Locked on Giants podcast, which runs Monday through Friday.
Patty, good stuff. We appreciate the time today.
Have a good day, Patty.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.